My stepmom tried to erase my mum's memory until I showed her the letter. Andrew Blake, 28, quiet and thoughtful, has always kept a low profile in his family. After his mother's passing, he became the invisible son, tolerated, but never truly seen, especially after his father remarried Kendra, a poised and perfectionist woman determined to reshape everything. Starting with the past, Kendra didn't just redecorate the house. She took down every photo of Andrew's mum, replaced family portraits, cleared out old albums. She insisted it was time to move on, but Andrew knew better. This wasn't healing, it was erasure. For a while, he stayed silent, until the day he returned to the attic and found a box his mother had hidden, untouched by time. Inside was a letter, written in her handwriting, addressed to him, and in that letter, she didn't just tell the truth. She gave him the words he'd been missing for years. At the next family gathering, Andrew didn't raise his voice. He raised the letter. And when he read it aloud, Kendra's mask cracked. In a story about love that refuses to be erased, and memories that fight to survive, Andrew learns that honoring someone isn't about keeping things, it's about keeping their truth alive. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Andrew's journey is far from over, and what comes next will change everything. Chapter 1. The Invisible Sunder. Autumn wind scattered crimson leaves across the driveway of the Victorian-style home on South Prospect Street. Andrew Blake stood motionless, one hand gripping his weekend bag, the other clutching his car keys so tightly they left imprints on his palm. At 28, Andrew had grown accustomed to feeling like a visitor in his childhood home, but today, something felt different, heavier. Burlington, Vermont had always been picturesque in October. The Green Mountains ablaze with color, Lake Champlain's waters reflecting the cloudless sky. But Andrew barely noticed the beauty anymore. Not since his mother's passing 5 years ago. Not since his father had remarried Kendra. Marshall just 18 months later. Andrew ran his fingers through his dark brown hair, cut shorter than he usually wore it for this visit. His hazel eyes, the same shade as his mother's, surveyed the house. The robin's egg blue exterior that his mother had loved had been repainted, a stark white. The flower beds where she'd planted her beloved hydrangeas now housed meticulously trimmed boxwoods. Little by little, his mother's touches were disappearing. "Are you planning to stand out there all day?" his father's voice called from the doorway. Richard Blake, 62, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture of a man who'd built a successful law practice, smiled at his son. The smile reached his mouth but not his eyes. "Just taking it in," Andrew replied, forcing himself forward. "The house looks different again." "Kendra's got an eye for these things," Richard said, clapping his son on the shoulder as he entered. "You know how she is always improving everything she touches, including you," Andrew thought, but didn't say. The foyer smelled of cinnamon and cloves, a far cry from the lavender scent his mother had preferred. Where there had once been family photos chronicling Andrew's childhood and his parents' 25 years together, there were now abstract paintings in muted grays and beiges. Finally, Kendra appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a pristine white apron. At 48, she was 14 years younger than Andrew's father and carried herself with the poised confidence of someone who had never been told no. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place. "We were beginning to think you'd gotten lost." "Traffic on I-89, Andrew lied. He'd actually sat in his car outside for 20 minutes, gathering courage. "Well, you're here now. Your father and I are thrilled you could make it for the weekend. The family reunion planning won't be the same without everyone's input." Her smile was practiced, perfected through years of social climbing in Burlington's upper circles. Andrew nodded. Knowing everyone meant Kendra's 2 daughters from her previous marriage, their husbands, and his father. His input would be noted, and promptly ignored, as it always was. "I'm going to take my bag up," Andrew said, already heading for the stairs. "Oh, we've moved you to the blue bedroom," Kendra called after him. "I converted your old room into my home office. Hope you don't mind." Andrew froze mid his childhood bedroom, gone without warning. He shouldn't have been surprised. It was the pattern. Erase, replace, move on. Sure, he managed to say, no problem. The blue bedroom was formerly the guest room, now redecorated in Kendra's signature style, minimalist, expensive, and utterly devoid of character. Andrew set his bag down and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. On the nightstand was a small framed photo of his father and Kendra on their wedding day. It was the only personal photograph visible anywhere in the house. Andrew pulled out his phone and scrolled to a picture of his mother, Sarah Blake, with her warm smile and kind eyes, taken at Lake Champlain a year before her diagnosis. The photo was his touchstone, his reminder of the woman who seemed to be vanishing not just from the physical world but from the family's collective memory as well. A knock at the door startled him. His father entered without waiting for a response. Settling in okay? Richard asked, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. Where are all the old albums? Andrew asked directly. Mum's albums. Our albums. Richard's expression shifted subtly. Kendra thought it best to put those away for now. It's been 5 years, son. So that means we forget her. Richard sighed, the lines around his eyes deepening. Nobody's forgetting your mother, but life moves forward. Kendra's part of our family now, and Mum isn't. Andrew challenged, his voice quiet but firm. That's not what I said. Richard's tone hardened. Dinner's at 7. Kendra's daughters and their husbands will be here. Try to be ... pleasant. After his father left, Andrew lay back on the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room. The weight of his mother's absence felt heavier than ever in this house that had once been filled with her laughter. Her garden clippings in mason jars, her dog-eared books on every surface. He thought about the attic, the one place Kendra likely hadn't redecorated yet. If any traces of his mother remained in this house, they would be there, tucked away like shameful secrets. Andrew made a decision then. He would find what remained of his mother in this house. He would not allow Sarah Blake to be erased so completely. Not while he still remembered the sound of her voice, the warmth of her hugs, and the wisdom in her words. Rising from the bed, Andrew moved to the window. Outside, Burlington continued its picturesque autumn day, oblivious to the quiet war being waged inside these walls, a war over memory, over legacy, over the right to keep loving someone who was gone. I won't let you disappear, Mom, he whispered to the room, I promise. If you're captivated by Andrew's story and want to discover what he finds in the attic, that will change everything, hit that subscribe button now. Family secrets don't stay buried forever. And you won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes to light in the next chapter. Join our community of storytellers and be the first to know when the next part of this emotional journey is released. Chapter 2. The attic's secret. The dinner that evening was exactly what Andrew had expected, a performance of familial harmony directed by Kendra. With everyone playing their assigned roles to perfection, everyone except Andrew. Kendra's daughters, Madison and Taylor, both in their early 30s, dominated the conversation with stories about their successful careers and perfect children. Their husbands, Jason and Eric, nodded along occasionally, contributing anecdotes that inevitably circled back to complimenting Kendra in some way. His father watched it all with the satisfied smile of a man who believed he'd successfully rebuilt his life. Andrew pushed his roasted vegetables around his plate, speaking only when directly addressed. The roast beef was perfectly cooked, the wine expertly paired, the conversation carefully curated to avoid any mention of the past specifically. Any past that included Sarah Blake. Andrew, dear, you've barely touched your food, Kendra remarked, her voice carrying the slightest edge beneath its sweetness. Is something wrong with it? All eyes turned to him. Andrew felt the familiar pressure to conform, to pretend. It's delicious, he said. Just not very hungry. He's probably still on that vegetarian kick, Madison said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Mum told us you went through some kind of health phase. That was 10 years ago, Andrew replied flatly. In college, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Well, Kendra said brightly, standing to clear the plates, Who's ready for dessert? I've made my famous tiramisu. As the evening wore on, Andrew felt increasingly like a ghost in his own family history, present but unseen, speaking but unheard. When he finally excused himself around 10, citing fatigue from the drive, no one protested. Instead of heading to the blue bedroom, Andrew waited in the hallway until he heard the dining room conversation resume. Then, quietly, he made his way to the end of the hall where a narrow door led to the attic stairs. The door creaked slightly as he opened it. Andrew froze, listening for any sign that he'd been heard. When none came, he slipped through and carefully closed it behind him. The narrow wooden stairs were illuminated only by the dim light of his phone. Each step groaned under his weight, a symphony of old wood and secrets. The air grew mustier as he ascended, carrying the scent of dust and forgotten things. The attic was exactly as he remembered it, a cavernous space with exposed beams and dormer windows that looked out over the neighborhood. Moonlight filtered through, casting long shadows across stacks of boxes and old furniture draped in sheets. Andrew swept his phone light across the space, searching for anything familiar. Most of the boxes were labeled in Kendra's precise handwriting. Holiday decorations, winter clothes, tax records. Nothing that suggested his mother's possessions. For nearly an hour, Andrew methodically searched through the attic, growing increasingly despondent. Had Kendra truly disposed of everything? Had his father allowed it? Then, tucked behind an old dresser, Andrew spotted a box that looked different from the others. It wasn't sealed with packing tape like Kendra's boxes. Instead, it was tied with twine, the kind his mother used to use for her garden stakes. Heart-pounding, Andrew carefully pulled the box forward and untied the twine. Inside, protected by layers of tissue paper, were the items he'd been searching for: photo albums, his mother's favorite scarf, a small jewelry box containing her modest collection, and several notebooks filled with her flowing handwriting. But it was what lay at the very bottom that made Andrew's breath catch. A cream-colored envelope addressed simply to Andrew. He recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. With trembling fingers, Andrew opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Andrew, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, and enough time has passed that you might be seeking me out in the traces I've left behind. I've hidden this box where I hope it will remain undisturbed until you find it. There are things I need you to know, truths I couldn't speak while I was with you. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to protect the peace of our family. For as long as possible. Your father is a good man who made mistakes. We all do. But what matters most is how we face those mistakes and what we learn from them. He and I had our struggles, especially in those last years. But I never for a moment regretted our life together because it gave me my greatest joy. My proudest achievement. I've watched you grow into a man of quiet strength and deep feeling. You observe more than you say, feel more than you show. In that way, you are so like me. But please don't make my mistake of keeping your truth locked away to spare others discomfort. Your voice deserves to be heard, Andrew. Your memories matter. Your feelings are valid. I fear that after I'm gone, there will be attempts to reshape our family story, to smooth over the rough edges of reality with a more convenient narrative. Don't let that happen. Not out of bitterness or anger, but out of respect for the truth. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was real. That reality, all of it, is your inheritance. In the jewelry box, you'll find my mother's sapphire ring. I've always wanted you to have it for the person you choose to spend your life with, when that time comes. It's been in our family for generations, and it carries with it the love of many lifetimes. Remember me, as I was in life imperfect but trying. Sometimes afraid, but always loving. And know that wherever I am proud of the man you've become, and the man you are still becoming. All my love, always and forever. Andrew read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. His mother's voice was so clear, so present in her words, that for a moment, he could almost feel her sitting beside him. The letter didn't just contain her words. It contained her permission to speak, to remember, to insist on the truth of their family story. It was exactly what he'd needed all these years when he'd felt silenced by his father's new marriage and Kendra's systematic erasure of Sarah Blake. Carefully folding the letter and placing it in his pocket, Andrew began looking through the photo albums there. They were the evidence of a life well lived. His mother in her wedding dress, laughing as his father twirled her on the dance floor. Baby Andrew in her arms, her face radiant with new motherhood. Family camping trips to the Green Mountains, picnics by Lake Champlain, Christmases and birthdays and ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. A particularly loud creak from the stairs startled Andrew from his reverie. Hastily, he replaced everything in the box except for the letter and one photo album. He retied the twine and pushed the box back behind the dresser, then made his way to the stairs with his treasures clutched to his chest. Tomorrow was the family reunion planning brunch. For the first time since his mother's death, Andrew felt a sense of purpose about his place in this family. He had found his mother's voice again and perhaps, in doing so, he had found his own. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm Morning. Light streamed through the unfamiliar curtains of the blue bedroom as Andrew awoke, momentarily disoriented. The weight of the photo album beside him and the folded letter under his pillow quickly anchored him back to reality. He hadn't dreamed it, he had found his mother's words, her truth. Hidden away in the attic. The house was already alive with activity. The clatter of dishes and the murmur of voices drifted up from the kitchen. The family reunion planning brunch was set to begin at 10, which gave Andrew just under an hour to prepare himself, not just physically, but emotionally. He showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing a blue button-down shirt that his mother had given him for his 23rd birthday. It was one of the few gifts from her that he still had, having taken it with him when he moved to his apartment in Boston. After graduate school, the photo album and letter were carefully placed in his messenger bag. Andrew wasn't yet sure when or how he would use them, but their presence gave him courage. Downstairs, the house had been transformed. The dining room table was extended to its full length, covered with a crisp white tablecloth and set with Kendra's expensive china. Fresh flower arrangements, perfectly symmetrical and utterly impersonal, adorned the center of the table and various surfaces throughout the first floor. "There he is." Kendra's voice rang out as Andrew entered the kitchen. She was arranging pastries on a tiered stand, her movements precise and practiced. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep through our meeting." "Wouldn't miss it," Andrew replied, reaching past her to pour himself a cup of coffee. "Where's Dad?" "Picking up your aunt and uncle from their hotel," she answered, not looking up from her task. "Madison and Taylor will be here with their families." "Any minute," Andrew nodded, taking a long sip of his coffee as he leaned against the counter. "What exactly are we planning today?" Dad wasn't very specific. Kendra finally looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. "The Blake Marshall family reunion, of course. Labor Day weekend next year, we're expecting at least 60 people." "Blake Marshall," Andrew repeated softly. "Another erasure. Another rewriting." "Yes, that's what families do when they blend, Andrew," Kendra said, her tone suggesting she was explaining something to a child. "We create new traditions, new identities." "And what about the old ones?" Andrew asked. "Do they just disappear?" Kendra's perfectly manicured hands stilled over the pastries. "I don't know what you're getting at, but today isn't the time for whatever mood you're in. This is important to your father." "My mother was important to my father too, once upon a time," Andrew said, surprised by his own boldness. Kendra's eyes narrowed slightly. That was a different chapter of his life. "We're writing a new one now." She turned away from him, effectively ending the conversation. "Would you put these mimosas on the dining room table? People will be arriving any minute." Andrew did as he was asked, the familiar pattern of compliance temporarily overriding his newfound resolve. But as he arranged the champagne flutes on the table, he caught sight of his reflection in the ornate mirror hanging on the wall, his mother's eyes looking back at him, seeming to ask, if not now, when? Within the hour, the house was filled with voices. Aunt Linda and Uncle Rob, his father's sister and brother-in-law, arrived with their adult children and spouses. Madison and Taylor came with their husbands and children. A few of Kendra's friends who had somehow been designated as honorary family rounded out the group. Andrew observed the dynamics with new eyes, how quickly his mother's side of the family had been excised from these gatherings, how thoroughly Kendra had centered herself in his father's life, how completely everyone had adapted to the new reality, everyone except him. The planning session began after brunch, with Kendra standing at the head of the table, a leather-bound planner open before her. "Welcome everyone to our first official Blake Marshall Family Reunion Planning Committee," she announced, smiling broadly at the assembled group. "Richard and I are so excited to bring our extended families together next Labor Day for what will surely become a cherished new tradition." His father, seated at the opposite end of the table, nodded in agreement, his face reflecting the contentment of a man who believed he had successfully navigated the choppy waters of loss and emerged into calmer seas. "I've taken the liberty of reserving the Shelbourne Farms coach barn," Kendra continued. "It's the perfect venue for our numbers and offers that quintessential Vermont experience for those coming from out of state. That's where Sarah always wanted to have her 25th anniversary party," Aunt Linda remarked, then immediately looked uncomfortable, as if she'd violated an unspoken rule. A heavy silence fell over the table. Andrew's father shifted in his seat. Kendra's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Yes, well," Kendra said after a moment, "it is a popular venue. Now, I've drafted a preliminary guest list, ... As Kendra continued outlining her vision for the reunion, Andrew felt a strange calm settling over him. The mention of his mother's name, the visible discomfort it had caused, confirmed what he'd long suspected. His mother hadn't just been physically removed from the house, she'd been removed from the family's permitted conversation, from their shared history. "I think we should include Mum's siblings," Andrew said suddenly, interrupting Kendra's monologue about potential caterers. "Aunt Jeannie and Uncle Mike were part of our family for over 25 years. Their kids grew up with me." All eyes turned to Andrew. His father looked startled, then concerned. Kendra's smile dimmed several watts. "I don't think that's necessary," she said smoothly. "This is a celebration of our current family. My mother's family is still my family," Andrew insisted, his voice quiet but firm. "They didn't stop being related to me when she died." Andrew, his father, began, a warning in his tone. "Why are there no pictures of her anywhere in this house?" Andrew asked, the question he'd been holding back for years finally breaking free. "Why is her name never mentioned? Why has every trace of her been scrubbed away like she never existed?" The room went completely silent. Madison and Taylor exchanged uncomfortable glances. The children, sensing the tension, grew still in their seats. "This isn't the time or place," his father said sternly. "When is the time, Dad?" Andrew pressed. "When is the place? It's been 5 years, and it's like she's been erased. Not just from the house, but from our conversations, our memories, our family." Kendra closed her planner with a definitive snap. "Your father and I have worked very hard to move this family forward, Andrew. Dwelling in the past helps no one." "It's not about dwelling in the past," Andrew countered. "It's about honoring it, acknowledging it. My mother existed, she was real, she mattered." "Of course she mattered," his father said, his voice strained. "No one is saying she didn't." "You don't have to say it," Andrew replied. "The empty walls say it. The conversations that stop when her name is mentioned say it. This Blake Marshall reunion that excludes half of my family says it." Kendra stood up, her composure slipping for the first time since Andrew had known her. "I have done everything I can to make this family work, to make this house a home again. I have been nothing but supportive of your father through his grief. How dare you imply that I'm trying to erase Sarah's memory?" Andrew met her gaze steadily. "Then why did I find her things hidden in the attic? Why was I moved out of my childhood bedroom without warning? Why does saying her name feel like breaking a rule in this house?" "That's enough," his father shouted, standing so abruptly that his chair tipped backward. "Apologize to Kendra right now." The room held its collective breath. Andrew could feel the weight of every Gazer's cousins, Kendra's daughters, the children too young to understand the undercurrents, but old enough to sense the tension. "I'm sorry if I've upset you," Andrew said finally, addressing Kendra. "But I'm not sorry for wanting to remember my mother. For wanting her to be remembered." With that, he pushed back from the table and left the dining room, the photo album and letter still safely in his bag, waiting for the right moment, a moment that clearly hadn't yet arrived. Behind him, he could hear the murmur of uncomfortable conversation resuming, his father's apologetic tone, Kendra's affected graciousness, the familiar pattern reasserting itself. Andrew made his way to the backyard, where the maple tree his mother had planted when they first moved in still stood, its leaves a brilliant crimson against the October sky. It was one of the few things Kendra hadn't removed, perhaps because it was too large, too firmly rooted to be easily dismissed. Like the truth, Andrew thought. Like memory, like love. He sat beneath the tree, feeling both shaken and strangely empowered by the confrontation. He had spoken up, had named the elephant in the room. It hadn't changed anything, not yet, but it had disrupted the careful fiction his father and Kendra had constructed. And for now, that disruption was enough. The letter in his bag was his mother's voice, her truth. There would be a time to share it, to let her words speak for themselves. But first, the ground needed to be prepared, the silence broken. Andrew leaned back against the rough bark of the maple tree and closed his eyes, feeling closer to his mother than he had in years. Chapter 4: The Breaking Point. The remainder of the day passed in a fog of strained politeness. After the confrontation at brunch, everyone seemed determined to pretend nothing had happened. The planning continued, with Andrew sitting silently at the table, neither participating nor leaving. His presence was a reminder of the truth he had spoken, uncomfortable but impossible to ignore. By evening, most of the extended family had departed, leaving only the immediate household, Richard, Kendra, Andrew, and Madison and Taylor with their families, who were staying for dinner. The atmosphere in the house was charged with unspoken tension. Kendra moved through the kitchen with mechanical efficiency, preparing dinner with Taylor's help, while Madison entertained the children in the living room. Richard had retreated to his study, presumably to avoid further conflict. Andrew sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The maple tree cast a long shadow across the yard, its silhouette a reminder of his mother's enduring presence. Despite all attempts to erase it, the sliding door opened behind him, and Andrew turned to see his father step onto the porch, 2 glasses of scotch in hand. Wordlessly, Richard offered one to his son, then took a seat in the adjacent chair. For several minutes, they sat in silence, sipping their drinks and watching the fading light. It was Richard who finally spoke. "Your mother wouldn't have wanted this," he said quietly. Andrew felt a flare of anger. "Don't tell me what she would have wanted. You've spent 5 years acting like she never existed." Richard winced. "That's not fair, son, isn't it?" Andrew challenged. "Name one thing in this house that still bears her mark. One tradition we've kept. One time in the past year you've mentioned her name in conversation." His father stared into his glass, the amber liquid catching the last rays of sunlight. "It's complicated." "It's really not," Andrew countered. "You remarried. I understand that. I never expected you to live like a monk for the rest of your life. But did marrying Kendra mean erasing Mum?" Richard sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. Kendra needs, to feel that this is her home too, that she's not living in Sarah's shadow. So you let her pack away every photograph, every memory. You let her redecorate every room, rename our family, cut ties with Mum's relatives. Andrew's voice rose slightly, despite his effort to remain calm. "I was trying to move forward," Richard said defensively. "For both of us, you moved forward." "I got left behind," Andrew said, "along with Mum." Richard drained his glass and set it down with a decisive clink. "What do you want from me, Andrew? What would make this right for you?" The question caught Andrew off guard. What did he want? He hadn't really thought that far ahead. He just knew that the status quo, the systematic erasure of his mother, was wrong. I want her to be acknowledged, Andrew said finally. Not just by me, but by all of us. I want her photos back on the walls, alongside the new ones. I want to be able to talk about her, without everyone freezing up. I want her family, my family included, in family gatherings. He paused, then added, I want her to still be part of our story, even if that story has new chapters now. Richard was silent for a long moment. I don't know if Kendra would accept that. Then that's the problem, isn't it? Andrew said quietly. It shouldn't be up to Kendra to decide whether my mother gets to be remembered in her own home, by her own family. Before Richard could respond, the sliding door opened again, and Kendra appeared. Her silhouette backlit by the kitchen lights. Dinner's ready, she announced, her tone artificially bright. Then, noticing the empty glasses and the serious expressions, she added, Is everything all right? We were just talking, Richard said, standing up. We'll be right in. Kendra lingered, for a moment, her gaze moving between father and son, before nodding and going back inside. This isn't over, Andrew said to his father. I can't keep pretending anymore. Richard nodded slowly. I know. He hesitated, then added, She did love you, you know. More than anything. I know, Andrew replied softly. That's why I can't let her be forgotten. Dinner was a stilted affair. The children's chatter provided the only natural conversation, while the adults exchanged polite but meaningless pleasantries. Andrew felt Kendra watching him throughout the meal, her eyes calculating, as if trying to determine how much of a threat he posed to the carefully constructed reality she had created. After dinner, as everyone gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, Andrew made a decision. He went upstairs to retrieve the photo album and his mother's letter from his bag. The time had come. When he returned to the living room, conversation stopped as he placed the album on the coffee table. What's that? Kendra asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Photos of my family, Andrew replied simply. I found them in the attic. Last night, Andrew, his father warned, but there was less conviction in his voice than there had been earlier. Ignoring him, Andrew opened the album. The first page showed his parents on their wedding day, young, joyful, full of hope for their future together. This is my mother, he said, looking directly at Madison and Taylor's children, who had crowded around curiously. Your grandpa's first wife. Her name was Sarah, and she loved autumn more than any other season. She made the best apple pies and knew all the constellations. The children looked fascinated. 7-year-old Emma, Madison's daughter, pointed at the photo. She's pretty. Yes, she was, Andrew agreed, turning the page to show more photos: family vacations, birthday celebrations, ordinary moments captured in time. The adults in the room had gone very still. Kendra stood rigid by the fireplace, her face a mask of controlled anger. Richard looked torn between stopping his son and letting him continue. Madison and Taylor exchanged uncomfortable glances with their husbands. I know this is difficult, Andrew said, addressing the room at large, but pretending she never existed isn't working. Not for me, and I don't think it's working for Dad either. He looked at his father, who didn't contradict him. You have no right, Kendra began, her voice shaking slightly. You come into my home. This was my mother's home first, Andrew interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. She chose the color of the walls, planted the garden outside, raised me in these rooms. I'm not trying to take anything away from you, Kendra. I'm just asking that we stop taking everything away from her. The tension in the room was palpable. Emma, sensing the adult conflict but not understanding it, climbed onto Andrew's lap to see the photos better. Who's that baby? She asked, pointing to an image of infant Andrew in his mother's arms. That's me, Andrew told her with a smile. And that's my mum holding me. Where is she now? Emma asked innocently. The room went completely silent. It was the question that had been avoided for 5 years in this house, not just her whereabouts, but her very existence. She died when I was 23, Andrew answered gently. But before she did, she wrote me a letter. He removed the envelope from his pocket. I only found it yesterday, hidden in the attic with these photos. Andrew, that's private, his father protested weakly. No, it's not, Andrew replied. Mum didn't write it to be hidden away and forgotten. She wrote it to be heard. He looked directly at his father. Especially by you. With steady hands, Andrew unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. My dearest Andrew, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, and enough time has passed that you might be seeking me out in the traces I've left behind. As Andrew read his mother's words, a profound silence fell over the room. Even the children seemed to understand the importance of the moment, sitting quietly and listening. The letter spoke of love and forgiveness, of the importance of truth and memory, of the courage to speak one's reality, even when it was uncomfortable for others. When he reached the part about his father, your father is a good man who made mistakes. We all do, but what matters most is how we face those mistakes and what we learn from them. Andrew glanced up to see tears streaming down Richard's face. Madison and Taylor were also crying quietly, perhaps hearing echoes of their own complex family history. In Sarah's words, their husbands looked uncomfortable but moved. Only Kendra remained outwardly unmoved, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. As Andrew finished reading, folding the letter carefully and returning it to his pocket, the silence in the room was absolute. It was his father who broke it. Sarah was right, Richard said, his voice rough with emotion. About everything. He looked at his son with new eyes that finally saw him, perhaps for the first time since Sarah's death. I've been a coward, Andrew, afraid of pain, afraid of the past, afraid of losing what I'd built with Kendra. But in trying to protect myself, I betrayed your mother's memory, and I betrayed you. He turned to Kendra, who was now visibly trembling. We've been wrong, Kendra, both of us. Trying to erase Sarah wasn't fair to Andrew, and it wasn't honest. It wasn't even necessary. How can you say that? Kendra demanded, her composure finally cracking. You think I want to live in a shrine to your dead wife? To compete with a ghost? It's not about competition, Andrew said quietly. It's about truth. Mum is gone, but she was real. She mattered. Her life mattered. Acknowledging that doesn't diminish your place in this family, Kendra. It just makes our story whole. Kendra looked from Andrew to Richard, and back again, tears filling her eyes for the first time since Andrew had known her. I didn't know her, she whispered. I never got the chance to know her. It was easier to erase her than to face the fact that she'll always be part of this family's history. The admission hung in the air, raw and honest in a way nothing in this house had been for years. Madison stood up, moving to her mother's side. Mum, I think we all understand why you felt that way. But maybe there's room for both stories here. Your story with Richard, and the story that came before. Richard crossed the room to where Kendra stood, and took her hands in his. I love you, he said firmly. That hasn't changed, and won't change, but Andrew is right. Sarah deserves to be remembered, especially in this house where she lived and loved and raised our son. Kendra looked down at their joined hands, then at the photo album still open on the coffee table. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. I think I need some time, but yes, we can find a way. It wasn't a complete resolution. There were still hurt feelings, still boundaries to negotiate, still healing to be done. But it was a beginning. A crack in the wall of silence that had surrounded Sarah Blake's memory for too long. As the evening wound down, Andrew felt both emotionally drained and strangely light, as if a burden he'd carried for years had finally begun to lift. The letter had done what his mother had perhaps intended all along. It had given him not just her voice, but his own. Chapter 5. Keeping her truth alive. 3 months later. Andrew pulled his car into the driveway of the Victorian house on South Prospect Street, his breath fogging in the cold January air as he stepped out. The Christmas wreath still hung on the front door, a concession to his mother's love of extending the holiday season well into the new year. One of many small changes that had occurred since that October weekend. The door opened before he could knock, and his father greeted him with a warm hug. Right on time, Kendra's just finishing setting up. Andrew smiled. noting the genuine warmth in his father's eyes, a marked change from the guarded expression he'd worn for so many years. Wouldn't miss it. As he stepped into the foyer, Andrew paused, taking in the transformation. The abstract paintings were still there, but they now shared wall space with family photographs, old and new, Sarah and Kendra, past and present, coexisting rather than competing. In the living room, Kendra was arranging a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her movements still precise but somehow less rigid than before. She looked up as Andrew entered. "Andrew," she said, offering a smile that, while not entirely natural, was genuine in its effort. "I'm glad you could make it." "Thanks for doing this," he replied, setting down the bottle of wine he'd brought and helping her with the tray. It had been Kendra's idea, surprisingly, this gathering to celebrate what would have been Sarah's 60th birthday. Not a sad memorial, but a celebration of her life with those who had known and loved her. Aunt Jeannie and Uncle Mike, Sarah's siblings, arrived next, bringing with them a comfortable familiarity that had been absent from the house for too long. They were followed by Aunt Linda and Uncle Rob, then Madison and Taylor with their families. Even a few of Sarah's old friends from her days teaching at the university had been invited. The house filled with voices, with laughter, with stories. In the dining room, a table had been set up with photographs of Sarah throughout her life, from childhood through college. Her wedding day, Andrew's birth, family vacations, ordinary moments captured in time. A celebration of a life well lived, not hidden away in an attic, but displayed proudly for all to see. Andrew moved through the gathering, listening to stories about his mother he'd never heard before, sharing some of his own, watching as his father did the same. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of awkwardness, still adjustments being made, but it was honest in a way the house hadn't been for years. He found Kendra in the kitchen, refilling a platter with cheese and crackers. She looked up as he entered, a question in her eyes. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. "I wanted to do something meaningful, but I wasn't sure. It's perfect," Andrew assured her. "Mum would have loved it. She always said birthdays were for celebrating, not mourning." Kendra nodded, some tension leaving her shoulders. "Your father has been sharing stories about her, about your childhood, about how they met." She arranged a few more crackers on the platter. "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was," Andrew agreed. "Not perfect, none of us are, but remarkable in her own way." "I think I was afraid," Kendra admitted, not looking up from her task. "Afraid I couldn't measure up to the memory of her. Afraid your father was only with me because he was lonely. Afraid this house would never truly be my home as long as she was part of it." "And now?" Andrew asked gently. Kendra finally looked up, her eyes clear and direct. "Now I understand that she'll always be part of this house, part of this family. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for me to..." She hesitated, then added, "Your letter, her letter, it helped me see that. The part about how acknowledging the past doesn't diminish the present." From the living room came the sound of laughter. Richard was apparently telling the story of how Sarah had once gotten their car stuck on a beach during a vacation in Maine, a family legend that had been untold for too long. "He's happy," Kendra observed. "Happier than I've seen him in years. It's like he's whole again." "I think we all are," Andrew replied. "Or, getting there, anyway." Later, as the gathering wound down and guests began to depart, Andrew found himself standing before the fireplace, looking at a new addition to the mantola photograph of his mother that had been taken about a year before her diagnosis. In it, she stood beneath the maple tree in the backyard, arms outstretched to the autumn leaves falling around her, her face alive with joy. His father joined him, following his gaze to the photograph. "That was always my favorite picture of her," Richard said. "She knew how to find beauty in small moments." "Yes, she did," Andrew agreed. "It's one of the most important things she taught me." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both remembering. "I found something else in the attic," Richard said finally. "After you left in October, a journal she kept during her last year." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. She locked it, but I think she would want you to have it now, when you're ready. Andrew took the key, feeling its weight. In his palm, another piece of his mother, another part of her truth, preserved rather than erased. Thank you, he said simply. For this, for today, for everything. Richard nodded, emotion making words difficult. After a moment, he cleared his throat. Kendra and I have been talking. We'd like to establish a scholarship in your mother's name at the university where she taught. Something to keep her legacy alive beyond just our memories. Andrew felt a surge of gratitude and pride. She would love that. And, his father continued, we're thinking of having the family reunion at Lake Champlain, instead of Shelbourne Farms. Your mother always loved the lake best. With the Blake and Marshall families, Andrew asked. And the Westleys, Richard confirmed, referring to Sarah's maiden name. All of us. Because that's what family is, all the branches, all the stories, all the connections. As the last guests departed and the house grew quiet, Andrew stepped out onto the back porch, gazing at the maple tree now bare of leaves but still standing strong against the winter sky. In his pocket was his mother's letter, carried with him always now, a touchstone of truth and courage. He thought about the journey of the past 3 months, the difficult conversations, the tentative reconciliations, the slow rebuilding of family bonds. It hadn't been easy. Change never was. But it had been necessary, and, ultimately, healing. His mother's voice seemed to whisper on the cold winter air. Your voice deserves to be heard, Andrew. Your memories matter. Your feelings are valid. She had given him those words when he needed them most, had reminded him that honoring someone isn't about keeping things, it's about keeping their truth alive. And in finding the courage to speak that truth, Andrew had not only preserved his mother's memory, but had also begun to build something newer. Family honest enough to acknowledge its past, and brave enough to move forward together. Standing there in the winter twilight, Andrew made a silent promise to the mother whose love had transcended even death. Her story would continue to be told. Her memory would continue to be honored. Her truth would continue to live, not hidden away in attics or locked in boxes, but woven into the very fabric of the family she had helped create. And in that promise was the greatest gift. Sarah Blake had given her son, not just the courage to remember, but the strength to keep loving, keep growing, keep becoming the man she had always known he could be. If you've been moved by Andrew's journey to preserve his mother's memory and find his own voice in the process, I hope you'll subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complex, beautiful, and sometimes difficult realities of family relationships. Every family has its untold stories, its hidden truths, its journeys of healing and reconciliation. By sharing these stories, we remind each other that we're not alone in our struggles or our triumphs. Hit that subscribe button now to join our community of storytellers and listeners, and be the first to know when our next chapter of life's most meaningful moments unfolds. Because, just like Andrew discovered, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is keep someone's truth alive. By sharing it with others,